Hey there, Shop Maniacs. You're listening to another episode of the Shop Talk Show. I'm ECMA Dave Rupert, and with me is Java Chris Coyer. Hey, Chris. See what I
That
did
was
there?
really good.
That was pretty good, huh?
Wow. That was one of your top 10, I'd say.
Yeah, that's
Ones. So.
good.
Yeah, we're going to talk about JavaScript a whole bunch and or ECMAScript and or what is even the difference between those two things and what are the specifications and group that help us produce and evolve those particular things. And we have the perfect guest to do that. Ujjwal. I just asked you and I lost it, but welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, thank you. I think our mutual friend and our colleague Brian connect us. Are you at Igalia or are you just know Brian?
No, yeah, I've been working with Brian for a couple of years at this point.
Okay. So you're at Igalia. Cool. I didn't even know that. I should have known that, but here we are. They're very influential to all things web. But you, in addition to that, it doesn't mean you're like just because you work there, you're automatically part of TC39. But you are a part of TC39, right? Is that that's a separate concern?
Yeah, so there's a number of people in Igalia that work on JavaScript or are super interested. A few of us are in TC39 and try to be more involved in the standard side, and it's quite close to, for example, what you might have worked with our colleagues on the WhatWeg side or in CSS. But yeah, trying to see what we can do, help move JavaScript forward.
Yeah, right on. So, okay, you mentioned the other things. What WG? You said it. That's the one that does HTML, right?
Yeah,
Okay, and then there's the thing, the CSSWG, CSS Working Group. They're the ones that do CSS, right?
exactly.
So is TC39 is just that for JavaScript.
Pretty
I'm sure they
much.
have different. I'm sure
Yeah.
they have different structures a little bit, because I do think this is one. I know precious little about this, despite all this time in there, despite its influence, and I'm interested in the output, of course. But I think there's probably a lot of our viewers in the same boat. That's like, who is it exactly, and like, how do you get in it, and what's their process, and how well does it work, and like, how many of you are there? All this, yeah.
You can use JavaScript every day and not understand how it's made or who makes it or,
Totally.
math.
I dropped my
Math
Tundra
is
off
weird.
at the dealership just now, and I have no idea how that thing works either.
Yeah, like math is weird, date is weird. What do I do? Who do I talk to? There's like all this sort of like, but then I know like every once in a while it'll be like TC39 did this. Whoa, check it out. And we are coming off a bunch of hot years, right? We're at like 2015, 2017, 2019, it's, so I don't know. I'm curious
There
what's
you
going
go.
on.
There's two things we know about TC39 before we pass it to you. One of them is you do like yearly releases or something. It feels like there's always like ECMAScript and then the year, and then we get stuff. There's just like a bucket of stuff that you get, which I think is like mega thumbs up, and I wish everybody else did that too. And then the other thing I know is that there's stages. So there's this thing called stage 0, which I think I know because of Babel used to like tie their crap to this at one point, which was like stage 0 means like it's just a feather in the wind. Like somebody was like, I think it would be cool if you could do this, and then it got progressively more serious until the feature is released. So those are the two things I know. Tell us about TC9.
Yeah, that is spot on. TC39, quite simply, is just the 39 technical committee of ECMA, which is a standards body like W3C or like IETF or ISO, just doing certain other things, mostly around computer standards, but I think it's safe to say that JavaScript or ECMAScript is their most relevant and most important standard. Uh, I think when it comes to TC39, the important thing is like this is a committee that by consensus designs new features and new additions to JavaScript, and might, in some rare cases, make breaking changes to the platform or to the language.
Ooh, juicy.
Yeah, so like you need to try to find within a committee structure like this, right? Like the correct stakeholders who might be interested, who might have the relevant expertise to sort of help us figure out these difficult problems, and that's one of our jobs in TC39 as in the chair group, so to say. So there's three chair people of TC39, me being one of them, and kind of the
You're one of the three chairs, right? That's
yeah.
which is like you're like the president then, pretty much. If there was
Well,
three presidents.
except well, in the American context, the president has like extreme executive power and like no accountability. So I'd say like it's the other way around, where we have
I
no
see.
real power and like only really responsibility. But it's really fun, and honestly, the goal
Okay.
is no, I'm sorry. The point is we try to make sure that, well, for one, all of the work that we do is productive. It is going to reflect the users, and sort of that we can reach consensus on contentious topics, and then
Mm-hmm.
otherwise just making sure that we have the right set of voices, the relevant people in the room. Apart from that, like one great thing you mentioned was like who's in TC39. I would say like as of right now, it is mostly it's either implementers, as we say. So this is basically people who are building browsers or any other kind of JavaScript engines. This can be like a JavaScript engine that runs in your fridge, maybe, or maybe
Okay.
not. But yeah, anybody who writes something that implements the language is a part, right?
I
Then
see. Is it you? Would you call that an engine or what? Or maybe not yeah. Okay. Because
so
there's engines and there's runtimes, and I think that's
exactly.
confusing too.
I think runtimes include many other things, including, for instance, web platform features that are not necessarily in JavaScript. And this is maybe one of the fun aspects, right? Like we talked about how TC39 defines, quote unquote, or standardizes JavaScript. But there's a lot of work that web developers do, even within JavaScript, that is not standardized by TC39, right? There's fetch, for instance, or a structured
That's just
clone.
that's fetch is just web specific. So
Right.
TC39 doesn't care. They're like whatever, do whatever you want.
Well, things have changed because these days we have runtimes like Dino, like Bun, that call themselves web interoperable runtimes. And so they are increasingly adopting web standards as the go-to way to add features and to sort of standardize within these runtimes. Because
Mm-hmm.
with more fragmentation, they need to kind of standardize how they work in order to be more appealing
Right.
to new
Okay.
users.
So that's changed. That's different than it used to be. I also think of stuff like I don't know, Chrome's putting like AI APIs into JavaScript, but those are just like things that you call. It's not like the language itself. It's different than like there's a new array operator thingy. That's like the language. It's not like some feature on top of the language, I
Absolutely.
guess. And those are just different. They're just different.
Yeah, like that is a whole thing as well. Within TC39, like we try to do both, right? Like we have, on the one hand, like the core language, how it works, the semantics, like what happens when you write, let's say, a few characters in a certain sequence. And then there's the API, the standard library of the language, if you will. And so something like Temporal or, math or
Mm,
the
right.
entirety of the internationalization feature set is an API. This is also very tricky for us, right? Because the language itself is, at least it's always well motivated, I would say, although there might be features that people disagree with. But when it comes to API and a language like JavaScript, you cannot push breaking changes or maybe play a lot with things once they're published. There's a lot of constraints, and so every single thing that has, let's say, a API of sorts has to justify its own weight and has to be, let's say, uncontroversial enough that we can be convinced that at
Mm-hmm.
least uh, for the how do I say this? For the foreseeable future, we don't have to make any changes to this. Of course, date might have failed that dramatically.
Well, that's ancient tech kind of, but what would be like an example of that? Like I'm thinking like web cryptocurrency or something. Like that would be like that's maybe not something we're gonna dip our toe in, or like what would be like the extremes of like what does TC39 look for in a proposal?
Well, yeah, I think I don't remember if web crypto per se has been brought to TC39, but there's other things, right? There's, for example, already things to do hashing. So, I mean, there's the basics are starting to trickle, and I think that's the controversial part where it's like you might have a understanding of how useful something can be, and then somebody comes in with a completely different perspective. And because of the way the committee is designed, the most important thing that we can ever do really is just make sure that the group represents all the different interests and make sure that the discussion is productive, because by design consensus means that you'll be forced in some ways to bend over backwards, but to basically design a feature that kind of satisfies everyone. And
Mm.
so the biggest risk can be that we can maybe misrepresent how interested somebody is in something or how
Ooh,
useful something
interesting.
is.
I like that. The biggest mistake is misrepresenting how interested somebody is. That's wow. Yeah, wow. That very much
Mm.
impacts the phone call I just got off of, but whatever. Um, but very cool. I guess like yeah, like one thing I hear Brian Cardell and even Eric Meyer always say is like it's also cool you had an idea for a feature, right? Like amazing, beautiful idea, but because we're on browsers that can run on almost any device or you're even not even thinking in the browser context, you're thinking in the like I guess the runtime context, maybe just like the like engine context. But like, can this run in a paint cycle? Can we add this to the platform and can it execute efficiently? And you know you're dealing in, I think I saw a Python pull request that was like moved it from like milliseconds to nanoseconds or something, moved some like, you know, lookup or something. And like, that's the scale you're thinking on, right? Like, is like nanosecond features, not milliseconds is probably too much, right? Like, that's kind of the scale you think.
Yeah, that's precisely the kind of thing I'm talking about. And thank you for exactly showing this perspective, right? Because what you're just talking about, this is usually how I see either engine developers, runtime developers, or just people who are interested in that aspect of programming talk about. And that's usually what they concern themselves with. However, web developers, and I'm not going to say that they ought to, but don't quite care about it.
Man, my
Sometimes
Mm.
website is 10 dooms big, man. What are you talking? I got 10 dooms worth of website
Well, we
over
know it
here.
from the CSS world a little bit because we've heard of this like we want contains or has or something. We wanted that for the last like 20 years, you know? And they're like, "Well, we can't." And the answer usually was because it's slow. And from an author perspective, you're like, "I don't care. Figure it out," you know? And then the only reason we ever got it was cuz somebody figured it out. But
yeah.
we didn't. Yeah, you're right that we didn't care about the speed, or at least on the surface. You know, maybe we would if it was released and it was super slow.
I think, yeah, the important aspect here is that both groups are right. Like the engine developer is correct in that this feature does have some cost and that adding things to the language makes it more complex and has all of these different issues that can, in the long run, make the language slower or harder to analyze and or many different things. On the other hand, the language needs to evolve and have to be responsive to its users, right? Users can't be using the language in tricky ways that feel outright like the language doesn't care about their use case or something like that. And so that is the balance of standards, at least in JavaScript, lies entirely in that gray area, right? So you mentioned numbers and math, for instance, and that's a big thing. So BigInts were added to the language, have a certain
Mm.
degree of let's say penetration or usage and add a real cost to the language because has a syntax that needs to be parsed, and so maybe like it's worth thinking about how slower the average JavaScript program is due to bigins if you've never used a single bigint in your life. And it's like, how
I
does
don't
it
even think
help?
there was types in JavaScript. You know, how do you? But it's not a type. It's like a function or something. I didn't even know
Uh,
that was a thing.
Bigins are a new primitive, so they are numbers that can only be integers and they're unbounded, so they can be as large as they would
So it
like.
is kind of like a type
Yeah,
in our lovely untyped version of JavaScript.
basically, right? And yeah, I think that's exactly the kind of complexity that can go either way, right? Like it can both, and I guess simultaneously unlock a lot of complex apps or different kinds of ways of writing code that were not possible before, but at the same time at a
Mm,
real cost to your day-to-day runtime, and that adds up.
interesting. So that one made it though. That's like, is that one done and
Yeah.
it's just like finalized stage
Yeah.
4 or whatever you want to call
So
it? Okay.
BigInts were a while ago, but I guess the point that I might extend to that is now it still doesn't fix the number story, right? Like we still don't have either higher precision numbers or just different numbers than we have right now, which is IEEE 754. It's like a meme on the internet. I know like everybody likes to make fun of them without
Is that the thing where it's like, isn't it like plus
yeah,
one plus or
point one
point
plus
one
point
plus
two.
point two?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
it's
point
weird.
three. So yeah, like the ask of adding a decimal type or an amount type to JavaScript on the surface might be quite well motivated because, this is something that developers always struggle with and have asked for forever, right? And this is like the biggest meme about JavaScript. We could fix that. However, it also has this runtime cost. So this is like where a lot of our real work, let's say, goes on in the sort of discussions and the compromises that are reached and sort of how the proposal is designed as a result of those compromises. And yeah, like
I get it. That's cool. It's like, I think of it like maybe like a scale, right? Like how complicated is it going to be and how much value there is. And BigInt is like, I don't know. Apparently, it adds a lot of complexity to the language, but it was somebody decided it was worth it. Did you get to vote? Did you get to like have a gavel or something and be like, all right, BigInt, thumbs up.
this was right before I joined the committee, though.
Okay.
But I think it demonstrates the point. I mean, it seems like y'all don't use BigInts all that much, and
I mean, I didn't even know it
it's been a
existed,
while.
so no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like sometimes, I think you probably deal with this is like you probably get like proposals for things that exist all the time. Or it's like I don't use it, so I don't like it's not in my day to day, like
Mm.
thinking, oh, I should reach for that. Like array buffers are like another good example. Like I don't buffer arrays, I just add to arrays, but like that's a thing you can do, and so I think
Mm.
like those are sort of like just I don't know. I think there's like parts of JavaScript or ECMAScript as a whole where you just don't really reach for it because you're not thinking about it, or it's not familiar. There's no muscle memory for it. And big and I'll confess that's like one of those things. I'm like, what? I've never had to add numbers more than like 4 5 digits. But
Mm.
if accuracy is my goal, right? I think I should be using BigInt because what's the like classic? It's like a like if a equals 1 and b equals 2, a plus b is like 2.9 or something. What the
Yeah,
like
point one and
those
two.
like
Yeah.
yeah, the point one off by point one errors. So I just like my
Mm.
understanding is BigInt just kind of solves those, right? Or like it's more exact, but like yeah, I think if I was writing spreadsheet software, I might think about it, but then I'd have to come up with the trade-offs. Like a spreadsheet can be infinite columns long, so oops, like I probably hurt myself, So
And I think you described it perfectly. There's all of these different ways that work we do plays out, right? And it's kind of our job to understand or predict what the impact is going to be in most cases. And I think properly assess, honestly, because if everything has a cost and it's like non-trivial in the long run, then it's like who decides what makes the cut? If we choose badly, like what can we even do about it afterwards? So yeah, like
Okay, I
as
got a proposal for you then. Let's do this one. I'm going to do it. And I assume it's like a GitHub issue or something. Is that how I would do it if I had a proposal?
as a GitHub repo,
A
you
repo,
can,
probably?
yeah.
Okay. All right, here it is. It's query selector sum. So it's not like query selector where it just gets one thing, or query selector all where it gets all the things. I'm just going to get a couple of them. That's my proposal. It's, you'd use it when you're going for like a random kind of effect or something like that. I don't know. I'd make a connection to the random function in CSS that like sometimes I just want like 3 of the 7 list items because I just do for some reason. Obviously, this is a really dumb proposal that I would get a bunch of thumbs down for. But like, let's say I made a decent case for it. Where would it fall in the like the complexity versus language versus all this? Like what would happen to me if I actually did this?
I'm not actually that good at assessing. Well, I'm gonna do it anyway. I think it's actually pretty good because, well, sort of role playing again as a committee member, I would say that like it fits the completeness argument. So as you mentioned, there's the all like query selector all, and then you have query selector, but not the sum method that allows you to filter them. Although, couldn't you trivially do it in a second call? Like it just makes it easier.
Absolutely. Yes, sure. There's only problems with this proposal, but I don't know. It's just now there's one call instead of two.
Yeah,
Which is okay. We can continue with this, but that does bring up a question to me. Is that like it seems like you get like I don't know 5 or 6 new things in the language a year or something. It feels something like that, and it also feels like but does it have to be? Like, could 2017 or 27 roll around and it'd just be like, nobody had any good ideas this year, so we're just not going to do anything instead of it having it be this like continuous march of minor change.
I think there's a high chance that it might get to that. I think over time, the language's evolution has slowed down. Ever since like the big ES6 update, I think
Mm.
people have gotten more and more conservative. And as I mentioned, like we do have a budget, right? And as we blow more and more of that budget on different features, people have to kind of become more and more conservative to maintain what the language does. Although there was this idea that maybe WebAssembly over time would take up all of the high performance use cases, and so we could just grow the language to infinity. But I'm not sure that people still think that's a good idea.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, wasn't there
Yeah.
also that like what was that forking the language between
Yeah,
I
the
forgot all the
JS0, JS
details of
sugar.
that.
JS
Yeah, yeah.
Sugar. Yeah. What I'm curious what happened to that because like that was like it was like whoa like they're just quitting or they're like everyone's gonna go do their own thing. I'm also curious like what about like ES6 specifically? I know it was like a huge push for everyone to get there and it was awesome. I think it's why JavaScript is popular today is because there's so much coming out for so many years, just super hype train. That was really good work. But was it just because it added so much sugar, like these high level things like async await, or what was kind of challenging about ES6 in particular?
Yes, I think it's not just about adding the sugar, right? Like we've been discussing that the sugar can quite quickly become, as we call in the committee, a foot gun, and you might end up hurting yourself badly. So I think the most special thing was that around ES6 and afterwards, the committee has been dedicatedly trying to put an effort to understand where the pulse is when it comes to what people do when writing JavaScript and to try to reflect to that in the best way we can in order to be more relevant and more appreciated. So, for instance, there were observables that were all the hype for a very long time, right? And it was pretty hard to make up our mind one way or another if we want to jump in. But now that a lot of the front end space has moved and converged around signals, that effort has moved into signals. So the idea is to continually find about different ways in which JavaScript developers either do the same things over and over again or are having the same issues or same problems and to fix those and to be able to
The
recognize like
old cow paths.
yeah, exactly, right. And that is something that can be as simple as sugar proposal like you mentioned. We have a number of these more recently. I think, for example, different syntax proposals added some degree of ergonomics to existing features, and I think that's always useful. We have object.has, for instance, now, which is, I mean, it's literally just a shorthand, but then temporal, right? And is literally the same category of things where it's like there is a pain point, except it is a massive pain point. It's an entire like namespace level object, whatever. And so when do we address this and how? And I guess like finally the solution ended up becoming quite a bit of a thing in itself, but that's where it started, where it's like, well, people are trying to figure out any way they can get away with not using date, and it's like that is not great for the language.
Well, we can tell that story now because you were super involved with Temporal, and you even kind of mentioned before the show that maybe like people have heard enough about Temporal, but I think they've heard, not on this show, they haven't, for one thing, because I don't think we've mentioned it that much, but people are probably vaguely aware that it's like dates in JavaScript are good now is the short is the selling point for it. I would point out that I was looking at the meeting notes or the agendas for TC39, and at the top there's a little temporal snippet of code that's like, if you're trying to figure out when this meeting starts in your time zone, just open your browser console and run this snippet and it'll tell you. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Anyway, I don't know that much about it other than the tagline of dates are good now, just less workarounds, less problems. I don't know what, but you were super involved with it, and it sounds like now's the time that it's really rolling out to you can just use it status in browsers, meaning the press around it is hot right now. Maybe if you're not too sick of it, give us the explanation.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one thing that I'm personally quite proud of talking about, but yeah, as I said, like I hope not to overexpose anyone to it. Temporal is something that started off in a pretty similar place, as I mentioned. One of the biggest concerns that we've had since forever is that the date object was just bad. There's no other way to say this. Even when JavaScript was being formulated, it was bad. I can say that because it is known to be a copy of the Java date object at the time. By the time JavaScript was actually available for the public, Java had already redone their date object. So we were the only
That's the
one.
story I remember. They pointed to like an old spec, basically, right? Like, or Brendan Ike. I'm going to throw Brendan Ike under the bus, but it was like just like an older version of the date object, right?
I
Yeah,
think they were
nice.
90s vibe coding, but yeah, they did a thing and they produced a language. Unfortunately, the date object wasn't ideal. There were a lot of problems that I could go through forever. One of them was that there was no consistent date time format. So basically, your date.parse could just do whatever, and any browser could parse anything. And there's a number of formats that are obviously not standard, but because a browser accepted them once, that has to be like, maintained
Mm.
for compatibility reasons. And that's a mess, right? So there were a few reasons why it was bad, and over time there was this growing sentiment by people that it was bad, and most of them were directed to use Moment.js until, you know,
Mm.
Moment.js became the de facto date object, and that wasn't ideal, right? Uh,
I forgot that saga. That was just like dates are bad, so use this big library instead, which was tolerable.
I mean, it made it tolerable, but there were big limits around how it could work, and obviously it would add to your bundle size. So it would basically force you to make this choice whether you want decent date handling or you want like yeah, a leaner bundle, right? So I think that's what Temporal originally came from. Like some of the first champions were the maintainers of Moment who genuinely wanted to bring their expertise back into the language, having worked on it for so long, like they knew how to do certain things and how to fix the language. However, quickly, like Temporal evolved and became something, let's say, complex. One way I can describe it is it is the single largest change that we've made to the language, single largest addition that we've made to the language. If you compare it with the entirety of the internationalization, namespace, object, and all of the constructors and APIs that it has, it's still, at least it used to be larger. It cut down a little bit, but maybe it's still larger. So yeah, it started off as being we need to like really put a band-aid over date because I mean it's unusable to the point where we ended up, for example, redefining the standard for dates and times, like timestamps in general. We ended up creating a lot of interesting patterns that are now starting to become more and more standard. So the other day I saw the Racket language has a new datetime API, and it's very inspired, like the names of the APIs and everything. But yeah, there's Rust libraries, for example, that try to do things this way. So
Mm,
I'm kind of proud that we spent all of this effort trying to not only make sense of like what the use cases are, how can we build like a novel API that can be easy to use and solve all of these problems, but also like how can we think outside the box and think of like all the use cases that might not be even possible at the moment. So it's like,
yeah. What is one of those? Like, what's something that you can just do in Temporal now that would have been hard or impossible before?
well, in Temporal, not only can you have dates in non-Gregorian calendars, but you can specifically serialize them or export them as such because we have standardized now this new timestamp format that includes both the time zone and the calendar in the timestamp itself. These are interoperable, given that it's in ITF. Hopefully, should be adopted by different languages and stuff. So you should be able
Yeah.
to do things like take a date and say, okay, this date is in the Hebrew calendar, and now I want you to add 1 month to this, respecting all the leap rule, like leap day and leap year rules,
Hmm.
which are more complicated in the Hebrew calendar than ours. And yeah, like it would totally do that. Even like this thing that of like adding, let's say, 2 months to a date without like handling everything else is something Temporal does is was impossible, right?
So if you said the date, did the date not have a way to say plus 1 month? It probably didn't, right? You'd have to do that yourself. And then, and even if it did, it probably wouldn't deal with, certainly wouldn't deal with a leap day. Okay, cool. And so the end product of Temporal from a TC39 perspective is not code, right? It's a spec, right? It's just an explanation of how it works. So you had implementers certainly like in the room, but it is interesting to me, like if an implementer from some important engine wasn't there, it's not really your problem. Is that a weird way to put it? Like you've made the spec, everybody agreed to the spec, it's going in the spec, and I don't know, I'm just gonna pick Apple. Like let's say there was nobody from Apple there, they're just gonna have to do it, right? They're just like, this is done, it's in the spec, so do it, you know?
The caveat here, I would say, is like the committee and its processes and like how we work has been designed in a way that it's kind of not our problem. That like whoever the delegate is from Apple, let's say, they would have so many different avenues to block a proposal. And I mean, it's only at stage 3 when
I
you
see.
commit to implementing it. So there's really so many ways to, I guess it's counterintuitive as well. It can feel terrible when you feel like you've put in so much work into something only to see it being blocked or sort of people being conservative about implementing it. But I think one of the, like as we talked about, we have a limited budget, and so being conservative is kind of like how the process is designed from the get-go so that we don't ship anything to the web that we're not 100% sure about.
Okay, okay. But so I guess that was a misunderstanding from me, though, is that the stages involve buy-in from implementers. So it couldn't never be stage 4 if some implementer had a very serious problem with it. It just
Absolutely, or
can't get there.
anybody else for
Right.
that matter. But yeah, like it kind of forces you to keep everyone on board, and like literally anybody disagreeing with you could hurt your proposal. So forces you to be very diplomatic.
And is like that is probably because like this is really low level, right? Like we can't change it, or if we do, everything breaks, right? Like all previous attempts to do time are now broken if you change it, right? Like CSS, it's like we might get a patch to a feature, right? Like actually we do, like I forget what the latest one was, but I'm just thinking like scroll snap type overflow does something different or what, but you don't really, they obviously try to avoid that, but you like can't ship a oopsie unless it's serious, right? That's kind of y'all's feeling.
That is true. I'm trying to remember specifically when was the worst instance of us doing that, maybe. But yeah, like certainly we don't have the resources to recover from something quite serious of this nature. I would say that there are a very small handful of features that we have either considered or have successfully removed from the web. Species constructor is one of them.
Mhm.
It made no sense, but well, it was, let's say, not used and was leading users down the wrong path and was decided that might be worthwhile removing. The way we
Cool,
can
interesting.
go about it is like we kind of have to verify that nobody's using it, and that can be complicated. Talking of implementers, like one of the nice things that they do have is stats from telemetry and so on. So oftentimes they can help us find out if there's some offenders or like how many of these exist. And so we were able to, for example, in this case, figure out that there was only really one website, and people could actually talk to them, reach out to them, and ask them to stop using that feature.
Nice. That's some like grassroots, boots on the ground stuff to get that out of there. I
I
remember there was like a story with SVG has this sub syntax called Smile, I think, SMIL, that like it's a declarative way of doing animation specifically only to SVG stuff. And it's always been on the possible chopping block, that people are like, God, I'd love to get rid of that. And then I remember like at some point it was discovered that YouTube had like a little animation in their play button, which made it on, half the internet that used it. So that alone kind of killed it. Although that's one example where you could, I mean, certainly Google's involved in all this. You could just get them to change it. But anyway, I do think that's extra interesting that mostly even us authors are pretty interested in not break, having stuff not break. And the web is super duper duper good at it, like unbelievably good at it. Websites from a zillion years ago continue to work fine. And I think all of us would have a very different feeling about the web if it was constantly breaking, or if there's a good chance that an old website just would stop working. That
I
would
think
just suck.
it's an essential feature, in my opinion, of the platform, right? Like the web platform is as special as it is to a lot of us because of this reason, and also because it's infinitely interoperable, right? Like you kind of don't ever expect anyone to like see something entirely different than what you built. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like as we can see a lot of technology, and maybe this is some perspective that I offer to web developers, but I can see a lot of technology outside of web development, especially when it comes to UI, converge towards web, or patterns that we've over the years sharpened at the web. So the other day I was using a game engine that implemented signals. So it was very
okay.
exciting and interesting. But yeah, like I can see functional programming languages adopting things from JavaScript and from the web, and who would have imagined, right? So I think the web has been really successful in terms of like being this like great platform to build for, and a platform that kind of respects people who build content for it, and maybe that's why web technologies ended up being so successful, right?
Yeah. So you said signals. Now I have to go through my list of pet features and get a status update. When is signals like where are we at? How do we feel? I've heard, and maybe this you can confirm or deny, like the generally the spec looks good and people like it, and there's like implementations floating. But then I've also heard like framework authors are kind of like, oops, we kind of like liked it being more secret or something. So like what, or like, I don't know, you're kind of stuffing personal data into it and now it's accessible through signals or so. So I don't know what's going on with signals, and how do we when do we get it?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure myself what framework authors dislike about it, but I do think that they are not exactly happy with the current version. And I think this is it, right? Like, usually writing out an entire proposal is unfortunately step one or step two. And so what follows is this series of discussions and agreements and disagreements and how we can navigate that. So as we can see, like even though we can demonstrate to the non-web developers, let's say in the committee, that this is something that is really like the cow path, so to speak, and we're just doing our job by paving it. but they can still disagree about how to implement it, and all we can do is facilitate this discussion. So yeah, unfortunately, it is still a early stage proposal. It is unclear because of that if and in what shape it would be finally added to the web. But yeah, like the only thing I can say is like a very important job the champions inside TC39 would have to do is to take this proposal again to the public, to the authors, and have a conversation about it, because it makes no sense to add a feature to the language if it is not going to see the adoption that they are hoping they would. So the only way to build signals into the language is through this. But I have to say, like, here a lot of web developers over the years have always wanted more things on the web. People said that they wanted React in the platform. I
Mm.
think personally that is not you know, the most future proof idea, because this is not like a building block. Maybe it's too much of a big solution, but I felt like signals could have been like that. So yeah, like it's also a exercise of how versatile any given feature is, and it's like, are we catering to just one group of users? And if we are, like, how relevant is this feature to them? And can we like actually also make it appealing to other users?
Yeah. Well, for me, like signals is one of those things where, you know, when I like look at the landscape or think and I'm in standards discussions or whatever, like if browsers, if I see like their ears perk up and they're like, "Ooh, we could maybe do that." I'm like, "Yes, let's go." Like because so many of them, are like, "Ah, we can't do that." That's too many gigaflops or whatever, like so like Signals is one of those ones where I felt like browsers were like, yeah, we could do that, and so that's where I'm like, what's the
Mm.
problem, everybody? It's like a reactive little variable that your little dude can subscribe to without even doing a whole whatchamacallit, like a whole like a mutation observer thing, and like seems cool. Like we hate this? Why? That's I don't know. That's
Like looking at it from just the engine's perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Like this doesn't add a whole lot of complexity. And again, like given the statistics we have right now in terms of like front end developers utilizing or just in off signals, I think they justify their own weight in that regard. But then we still need to come to terms with like what do we want them to look like, and that can be a problem. Like one example that I can give is the pipeline operator. The pipeline operator has been sort of in the works forever, right? And people keep asking me when it's going to happen.
Mm.
The issue is that the space, let's say the pipeline space, is uh, like has basically broken into two camps. Both want a completely different version of the proposal, and guess what? Like a much more likely outcome at that point is that neither comes to the language. So it's like, yeah.
yeah, that's hard. Right?
Mm.
Sort of like gift horse, looking the gift horse in the mouth. They're kind of like, you could have this, but what you want is a 20-year road. So, or I don't know. I was kind of, but I understand. I understand, like, feature incompleteness. I work on web components. There's a lot of hatred, vitriol about just like the incompleteness around that API, but that also comes from years of non-implementation. And so that's a different realm, but that's like, you know, that's interesting. Can I get you to the next bit of hot drama? Signals is very
Is it going
interesting
to be
to me.
TypeScript? What are
It's
you
gonna
going
be,
to do?
yeah, types, comments, types.
Okay.
That I was
Yeah,
like, let's
I
go,
knew
let's
it.
ship it. I hate TypeScript. Whoops, let's go.
I think you're not going for the uncontroversial ones. Yeah, types as comments is fun, I would say, but it is also, again, like one of the trickiest things that we could possibly imagine doing. One of the big problems with this is, first of all, I hope like this is for all of the TypeScript fans. I hope they realize that this is not TypeScript, right? Like this is a syntax space reserved in the language for in the space basically where TypeScript makes you put types. So what this means is that you can take a bunch of TypeScript code and copy paste that into the console and run it without having to compile it, and that's it, right? So
Whoa, that's further along than I thought it was. Really? You could just, is it the TypeScript syntax is theoretically
yeah,
works with the JavaScript syntax? Oh, that would be
it's
amazing.
basically just redefining that little space between, let's say, the brace and the whatever, where you
Yeah.
specify the type between the colon and the brace, let's say. And it turns that into a comment. So basically, the engine would just ignore that.
Just ignores it. Yeah. Yeah.
The
Fine.
problem is with the grammar. For example, like we, have this grammar, complex grammar for expressions. What do they look like? What is a line of code in JavaScript? And by introducing this new, let's say, space of like comments, we cannot do this in a way that either is impossible to parse, obviously, or is too expensive to parse. So that brings some concerns regarding like how much of TypeScript syntax would be valid. Like, is it that we might have to restrict some things and so on? And at that point, how useful this is. But yeah, like the general idea is that if we can give a better ergonomic experience to TypeScript developers in terms of being able to try TypeScript out on the, let's say, your browser console, on using the tools that you have, or just the ability to run simple TypeScript scripts without compiling them. And that's pretty much it. Like any large TypeScript project wouldn't be affected by this because they anyway compile, minify, do everything they can to
Right.
have,
It
yeah,
kind of means that like tools like ESBuild who say, "Oh, we just take your native TypeScript and run it. It's cool." What they're probably doing inside is just some fancy stripping of all the TypeScript stuff and then they run it. Because I know that they don't help you. They don't tell you when there's a type problem. So, yeah, but it just means that they wouldn't have to do that because the engine that it runs on would be
exactly.
doing it.
And this is literally it, what you said, right? Like just if you build this into the browser console or into the engine, that is what the feature is talking about. Like it's gonna ignore all of the types.
Okay.
Hmm.
How
And
does that
so,
make you
like,
feel, Dave? Are you still excited about it, or is
yeah,
it
well, I'm a JS Doc fan, but I think I'm a JS Doc fan because I I don't have to compile. I don't have to bring more tooling. I don't, like I think that's why I like that.
And also like we're talking about types as comments. I mean, JSDoc literally uses comments, and is a format that is widely used also in other languages and stuff. So I also agree that JSDoc is, in my opinion, a superior solution.
But I understand why people don't like it. Probably the people who made TypeScript, for example. But like,
It's like
like,
verbose, I guess, is
yeah, I, but I think like, I, I, it seems like we need something like we're typing JavaScript now. Everybody get used to it. CSS has types. Look at that. Like JavaScript should probably have them too.
so different?
Isn't it wild? CSS beat JavaScript at something. But like, I guess my question has like these new, native TypeScript support. Bun doesn't it do native TypeScript support? Node 2 does native TypeScript support, but I think like what Chris is saying, it's kind of just the like strip it out version. It's not, you know,
Yeah,
like
that's what's so
red
boring to me
squigglies
about it,
in
though.
your
Makes me not like it.
I
Because
think
it's
yeah.
like
that's
nobody is shipping a bunch of JS doc comments or TypeScript to the browser. You're
exactly.
just not going to do that. It has to go through a tool anyway. And I always get excited about the things that get added to language that make you use less tools. Signals will totally be like that. Or CSS features that are like, I don't have to use JavaScript for this thing now. I can just do it in CSS, which is the more appropriate place to do it, which is like almost everything that CSS ships. And it's so cool. But this just doesn't do that. There's yes, it's kind of neat that your TypeScript isn't gonna like throw when you paste it into a console now or something. Is that like a minor upgrade? Yeah, I guess, but nobody's gonna ship websites like that because it's just all a bunch of extra bytes that don't do anything. So you're gonna need a tool anyway. And when you need a tool anyway, then I'm immediately less interested.
It's mostly gonna just improve the developer experience and make it a bit more ergonomic to test your code. It's not nothing. It's just a lot less than what might be the first thought when you think about the proposal. But yeah, like what you said, right? Like this exactly demonstrates that TypeScript is literally just ASDoc. Like it's fundamentally they're both the same. These are not runtime languages. These are languages that you write, but are going to be compiled away into something that does run and has a well-defined runtime. So yeah, I think it's like it's gonna help people who might, want to do more things with TypeScript, but not necessarily anybody like is gonna be, let's say, benefited a lot by this, or like a project in production is gonna be sped up by this or something.
Mm.
So, but do you think this is something that's maybe coming, or is it kind of dead in the water, or where do we feel like it is right now?
I think that's where it stands at the moment, where it's like, on the one hand, they have this grammar that can, go either way, right? Like either they can be too restrictive, at which point maybe TypeScript fans are like not convinced, if they have to imagine, like if you have to stop using a whole lot of features from the TypeScript sort of a space to be able to make use of this, then what's the point? And conversely, right? Like if somebody who doesn't use TypeScript at all is gonna notice like a whole lot of changes in how their code is parsed, they might not like it either. So as long as the proposal doesn't balance these two, it's unfortunately not gonna progress.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I sort of
I'm
see.
more
Yeah,
into it if it's not a new syntax. I feel like the first day I ever saw it, it looked different. Like the little code snippets weren't TypeScript; they were some other kind of syntax, and that's like, oh well, you're gonna invent a new way to do types. That seems even more boring. But
That's another thing,
I don't
by the
know.
way, right? Like it doesn't enforce TypeScript in any way. It just like, I mean, I guess it enforces it in that it agrees with where they choose to keep the types, if that makes sense. Right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
location of
hmm
the types is consistent, but I mean, there's no real reason that you have to put like a valid TypeScript type, for instance, in there. Yeah, like I don't know. Like
Mm,
there's a lot of
a little weird.
these concerns about this proposal, which is that how useful it is to TypeScript users, how useful is it to everybody else, and like, you know, are we going
I'm
to
also
the
curious whether would the spec be like, because it seems like it's one way you could write this spec from a layman's perspective is whatever crap is in TypeScript, just strip it out and run it. You know, like that. It's like one paragraph long or 50,000 words that in detail describe the TypeScript syntax and what and how you can remove it safely or whatever. Like which is it? It's probably, to me it seems like it's closer to the document that takes you 5 minutes to scroll through because specs are always super duper duper long. But does it have to be?
I guess, I mean, in this case specifically, because unfortunately TypeScript is not really tied to a standard, which means that it can over time
Yeah.
grow in different ways and shift. And I think one of the most important things is like to be able to give the implementer all the references, all the knowledge that they're going to need to implement something.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when it comes to something like TypeScript syntax, it can be quite complex because I'm sure that while the language has grown, they haven't also had the time to sit down and like check all the complexity that has gone into it. So it's quite a interesting syntax. I know people have built entire programs using just the type syntax. So I
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That guy that did Doom or whatever.
yeah. So it's like, it's a very complex syntax. It's a static type checker, so it does its job, but it is not. It's
Yeah.
very different
I
from
know
what we
there's
do.
dangerous stuff, right? Like it does enums, and there's no way that syntax is going to make its way to JavaScript anyway.
that's. I'd almost like to you know, you know. I'd love to see almost like a. This is like here's this big gnarly TypeScript file with all these gnarly types. Mega union joins, blah blah blah. Like, and then like here's like what the equivalent. Here's like the pieces that would be like in JavaScript, and but these pieces would be TypeScript or something like that. But I also think back to like what you said, like if we want perfect, if we want exactly TypeScript in the browser, like it's kind of like ECMAScript isn't offering that right now. They're offering TS Lite, you know. I think people
Neither
get hung
is
up.
TypeScript for what it's worth. TypeScript
Well,
is not interested in giving you this standardized, backwards compatible language because they do understand that it's against their goals of giving people like this tool that sort of understands you and maybe grows and breaks and sort of does all these things.
but I think like what people miss from the picture is TypeScript gets better if JavaScript has types, right? Like, and then TypeScript can pile on all of its complex sort of inventions. Like it's sort of like, everyone has to meet the weird demands of some dude who just has big opinions, like so how do you like TypeScript would get better. I know they're like porting everything to Go or whatever right now, but like that would get better too. Like like it
For
gets
sure.
better if we have something, even
I
if it's not perfect
Let me
or whatever.
add one
Perfect.
more axis to this, which is that TypeScript will get better. However, TypeScript will also get more conservative or more restricted when this happens, because now they do not have the ability to do whatever they would like with the syntax, which I mean they have the right to, and that's what's made them so popular. Maybe in some cases more popular than JavaScript itself. So it's like I think it's a interesting problem where it is the case that there is one really great user facing language that responds a lot better to its base, to its developers and everyone. And then there is this rock solid stable language that is consistent to run. And maybe these need to be two separate languages. But as of right now, like JavaScript still intends to do both. And so yeah, like because TypeScript
Mhm.
only really offers the first, it's very easy for them to be like more attuned to like the needs of their users and yeah, just have less constraints to work with.
It's like they operate with full control now. That would be yielding some control. Maybe that's worse for
Mhm.
them. Yeah, I guess I understand that. Yeah, yeah.
Because when they're in the room, they see how we talk about new changes to the syntax, and I wouldn't be surprised if they saw that and were like, yeah, okay, we're better off changing our own syntax.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting.
I'm just nervous that it goes first and then some rules get written about what happens with angle brackets and that it stops something like JSX in the browser because JSX has angle brackets in it. Not that I want exactly JSX in the browser, but I think templating is like something that seems would be nice that JavaScript would take on in some fashion.
Yeah.
And if we left angle brackets available for that, that would be okay with me.
I think technically some form of templating is gonna end up relatively soon on the web. Let's say, like, fingers crossed. But this is kind of my next project after Temporal.
Ooh.
Like, we call it the message format standards. Basically, like in Unicode, people have been working on this sort of next, let's say, next evolution or next whatever like form of this simple idea of message format, which used to be an ICU library. So ICU is this like low level internationalization library which is used to basically provide the higher level internationalization tools that are found in OSs and browsers and everything. So for example, Mac OS uses ICU to provide its own like Swift and whatever like internationalization libraries that then the developers use. So ICU has its own templating format that does, locale or language specific operations, helps you sort of publish messages in different languages. And
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of problems with this, similar to how there were a lot of problems with date in general. Like it was not completely outdated, but had very strong limitations that made, as like we mentioned earlier, like the web has really become the golden standard for UIs and like interactive UIs, responsive UIs. So that standard was pitifully unsuitable for this use case, and so people started working on the next sort of big thing that has now become a standard, at least the format is. And is in ICU, and the next step is to add it to the web. So the two ways that we've been thinking about it is either through JavaScript, which we call the into message format proposal, which had some blockers. So again, like our story continues, TC difficult sometimes to get things through, but it's by design, I would say. And then since then, one of my colleagues, Emily from Mozilla, who is heavily involved in this, is working on this in the DOM. So I think they're calling it DOM localization or something, but basically, like this could be built in to the browsers, to the web platform, and you could have language or locale aware templating.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Interesting.
You think that people would be pretty interested in that, because I know localization can represent money to SaaS companies. You know, like if your app is like perfectly translatable to native languages of where those users are, they're just more likely to pay you. You'd think SaaS would be pretty into this concept. I would be saying.
I mean, why would you want to open your app to like 2 billion people in China? That just makes no sense, Chris. Wow. Yeah.
I
All
think
right,
that's one of
Dave.
the best ways to like convince people to support internationalization. But in general, there's so many reasons, right? Like tech is still in many ways not really represented in the way that we have people in the world and sort of accessible to everyone. And this is beyond what we talk about in other ways in accessibility and like improving the localization and nationalization picture of the web helps us also increase the platform, have more developers, and in general more work, more creativity.
Well, cool. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you very much for talking about this. I know I think I have like a million more questions, but that's okay. We'll cut it off. But before we do cut it off, how can people find you online and give you money? How does that work?
Well, you can find Igalia, and you can find me on the internet as Ryzokuken. It's spelled Ryzokuken. I know it's weird, but that's
All
what it
right.
is.
Yep.
And yeah, like find us on TC39 or drop by in any of the channels. In general, the goal here for me in general as well is to engage with more developers, is to engage with people who use the tools that we work on and to have a better idea of how they're actually used as opposed to just being theoretically aware of how they're used. And so yeah, like I would encourage anyone who's listening to participate, to reach out and to tell us what you think about
Yay.
JavaScript.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you very much again for coming on the show. And then, yeah, thank you, dear listener, for downloading this in your podcatcher of choice. Heart it up. Thank you. We appreciate that. And then join us over in the Discord, patreon.com/shop.show. Chris, did you have anything you were going to say?
Vote now on shop.show.com. Kind of.